The idea seemed perfect at first. Sarah and I had been best friends since college, and after 5 years of working our separate jobs in different cities, we finally managed to coordinate our vacation time. We decided to rent a cabin in the Cascade Mountains, about 3 hours from Seattle. The listing looked beautiful, secluded, surrounded by towering pines, with a wraparound deck and floor-to-ceiling windows. The price was surprisingly reasonable for peak season, but we didn't question our luck. The drive up was gorgeous, though the road got progressively narrower and rougher as we climbed higher into the mountains. Our cell service disappeared about an hour before we reached the turnoff for the cabin. The property manager had warned us about this and provided detailed printed directions, which Sarah was reading from the passenger seat. The sun was setting by the time we pulled up to the cabin, casting long shadows through the trees. The inside of the cabin was charming, if a bit dated. Heavy wooden furniture from the 70s, a stone fireplace, and faded photographs of landscapes on the walls. It smelled of pine and something else I couldn't quite place, maybe mothballs or old fabric. The property manager had left the key under the mat as promised, along with a detailed set of instructions for the generator, water pump, and other essentials. While Sarah unpacked our groceries, I browsed through a guest book sitting on the coffee table. Tucked between its pages, I found several yellowed newspaper clippings. They were from the local paper, dated 1978, describing the disappearance of 2 young women from a nearby hiking trail. The articles mentioned they had been staying at a rental cabin in the area. Their car was found at the trailhead, but they were never seen again. That evening, we decided to explore the cabin thoroughly. The basement door was stuck, but with some effort, we got it open. The stairs creaked under our weight as we descended into the musty darkness. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling cast strange shadows on the stone walls. There were old tools hanging on hooks, canning jars on dusty shelves, and a large chest freezer unplugged in the corner. Something about that freezer made my skin crawl. Its white surface had yellowed with age, and rust crept up from the bottom like bloodstains. Sarah noticed my discomfort and joked about bodies hidden inside, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. We headed back upstairs and spent the evening drinking wine and catching up, trying to ignore the growing sense of isolation. Around midnight, the motion sensor light on the deck suddenly turned on. We both jumped, then laughed at our nervousness. Through the windows, we could see nothing but darkness and the rain that had started falling. Sarah suggested it was probably just a deer. 10 minutes later, the light activated again. This time, I thought I saw a shadow move across the deck, but the rain made it hard to be sure. The next morning, we found muddy boot prints on the deck. They led from the forest to each window of the cabin, as if someone had been peering in at us all night. Sarah wanted to call the police, but with no cell service, our only option was to drive back down the mountain. As we were discussing what to do, we heard an engine start. It was coming from the overgrown path behind the cabin. We followed the sound and discovered tire tracks leading deeper into the forest. They looked fresh. The path was too narrow for my car, but it seemed to connect to another road on the other side of the property. Someone had been watching us from back there, probably parked in the trees all night. We quickly packed our bags, deciding to cut our vacation short. That's when everything went wrong. My car wouldn't start. The battery was completely dead, though I'd had no problems the day before. Sarah suggested we check under the hood, and that's when we saw it. Several wires had been cleanly cut. This wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately disabled our only means of escape. We ran back inside and barricaded the door. Sarah's phone was missing. She was sure she'd left it on the kitchen counter the night before. Mine was still in my bag, but it was smashed, the screen shattered as if it had been stepped on. Whoever was out there didn't want us calling for help. The property manager wasn't scheduled to check on the cabin for another 5 days. In our panic to find another way to communicate, we searched the cabin more thoroughly. In the basement, behind some boxes, we found an old ham radio set. It looked like it had been unused for years, but when we plugged it in, a red light came on. Neither of us knew how to use it, but we started pressing buttons and turning dials, hoping to reach someone. While we were fumbling with the radio, we heard footsteps on the deck above us. Then we saw feet through the basement window. Someone was walking around the cabin. I covered Sarah's mouth before she could scream. The feet stopped right above the window, and we saw a hand press against the glass, leaving a print in the dust. Looking around the basement with growing horror, I realized something we'd missed before. All the tools that had been hanging on the wall were gone. Our stalker had taken them while we slept. The realization of how vulnerable we were hit me like a physical blow. We were trapped in the basement of a remote cabin with a possible killer upstairs. As we huddled in the corner trying to figure out what to do, Sarah found a box of old photographs. They showed the cabin in the 70s, and with a shock, we realized we recognized the two women in some of the photos. They were the same ones from the newspaper clippings, the hikers who disappeared. In the last photo, they were standing on the deck, smiling, unaware they would soon vanish without a trace. That's when we heard the basement door open. Heavy footsteps started down the stairs. In desperation, we hid behind the old freezer. The padlock that had been on it was now broken and lying on the floor. Recently broken, the metal still shiny where it had been cut. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, and a shadow fell across the floor. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital. The police told us a hiker had heard Sarah's scream and called for help. They found us unconscious in the basement. We'd been drugged with something that was pumped through the cabin's air vents. The freezer was empty, but when they tested it, they found traces of human DNA decades old. They also found newer DNA from just a few weeks before our stay. The cabin rental website disappeared a few days later. The property manager's contact information led nowhere. The photos and name were stolen from a real estate agent 3 states away. The police investigation revealed that similar disappearances had occurred every few years, but the bodies were never found. They believe the killer used the rental cabin as a trap, disabling victims' vehicles and isolating them before striking. Sarah and I were lucky. We were found before we could be added to the freezer's grim history. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about those boot prints on the deck, those eyes watching us through the windows, and I wonder if he's still out there, posting another rental listing, waiting for the next group of friends to ignore the too-good-to-be-true price of a secluded mountain getaway. I should have known better than to trust a last-minute luxury rental deal on social media. But when my best friend Rachel showed me the listing for an oceanfront villa in the Florida Keys at 70% off, I couldn't resist. The photos looked stunning: floor-to-ceiling windows, private beach access, and a modern design that probably graced architectural magazines. The owner claimed they needed someone to house sit while they were away on business, hence the steep discount. We arrived just before sunset on Friday. The house was even more impressive in person, all glass and steel and modern furnishings. Everything seemed perfect at first, though I did notice some odd details, like the knife block in the kitchen that was missing several pieces, or the fact that all the mirrors in the house had been removed, leaving conspicuous empty spaces on the walls. Rachel discovered the security cameras while we were unpacking. They were discreet, tucked into corners of every room, their red lights blinking steadily. The listing hadn't mentioned surveillance, but we figured it made sense for such an expensive property. We joked about making sure we stayed decent, unaware that we were already being watched by someone with far worse intentions than catching petty theft. The house had an iPad that controlled everything: lights, temperature, security system. While playing with it, we found the security camera app, but something was wrong. The feed showed 9 different camera views, yet we'd only counted 6 cameras in our walkthrough. The other 3 had to be hidden somewhere. Even more disturbing, one feed showed what looked like a room we hadn't seen yet: concrete walls, metal shelving, harsh fluorescent lighting. We spent the next hour searching for hidden rooms. Behind a panel in the master bedroom closet, we found a door. It was sophisticated, with an electronic lock requiring a fingerprint. The panel had been designed to blend perfectly with the wall when closed. We only noticed it because the edge wasn't fully sealed. Someone had been in there recently. That evening, we tried to shake off our unease by enjoying the infinity pool overlooking the ocean. The underwater lights created an ethereal blue glow, and the sound of waves below was peaceful. Then the pool lights suddenly went out. We heard the click of the electronic pool cover starting to close. Someone had activated it remotely. We could see the iPad glowing through the living room window, but we'd left it on the kitchen counter. We scrambled out of the pool just in time. Standing in our dripping swimsuits, we noticed something that made our blood run cold. There was another set of wet footprints leading from the other side of the pool to the house. While we'd been swimming, someone had been watching us from the water. The prints disappeared at the kitchen door. They had gone inside while we were distracted. Suddenly, all the lights in the house went out. The iPad showed "System offline" in angry red letters. Even the cellular signal was dead, though it had been fine moments before. Someone had activated a signal jammer. We were completely cut off, standing in the dark, knowing the intruder was somewhere inside with us. Rachel ran for her bag, where she'd left her car keys. They were missing. So was her phone. My bag had been moved slightly on the counter. My keys and phone were gone too. Everything else was still there: wallet, makeup, sunglasses. This wasn't a robbery. The intruder just wanted to ensure we couldn't leave or call for help. We tried to open the front door, but the electronic lock had been overridden. The same with all the other doors and windows. The glass was hurricane-proof. We couldn't break it. The house's security features, which had seemed so impressive earlier, were now a trap. We were locked in our luxury cage with someone who knew exactly how to control it. In our desperate search for a way out, we found another hidden door. This one led to what looked like a control room. Banks of servers hummed softly, and multiple monitors displayed what appeared to be camera feeds, not just from this house, but from others too. Some showed empty rooms, others showed people going about their lives, unaware they were being watched. A stack of newspapers on the desk made my heart stop. They were articles about missing tourists in the Florida Keys over the past 5 years. Each disappearance followed the same pattern: couples or friends booking last-minute luxury rentals at steep discounts. The properties were always different, but the victims were similar: young, affluent, unlikely to be immediately missed. The shelves were lined with external hard drives, each labeled with a date and what looked like initials. With trembling hands, I connected one to the computer. It contained videos, hundreds of them, showing people in various luxury rentals. The footage started normal, but always ended badly. We weren't this person's first victims. We were just the latest in a long series of carefully planned traps. Looking closer at the equipment, I realized this was more than just a surveillance system. The intruder had complete control over every aspect of the house: air, water, electricity, locks, everything. There were other controls too, labeled with different addresses. This wasn't just one house. It was an entire network of traps, all controlled from this room. On the desk, we found a medical report about various sedative compounds. Some of the words were highlighted: colorless, odorless, water-soluble. With horror, I remembered the pool. The sudden darkness, the closing cover. It wasn't just to scare us. They had been herding us into treated water, waiting for the drugs to take effect. Rachel found a laptop with dozens of fake rental listings ready to post. Each property was real, but the photos were stolen, the prices manipulated to attract specific types of victims. The owner information led to shell companies and disposable phones. Everything was meticulously planned, refined through years of practice. That's when we noticed one of the monitors showing a news feed. A tropical storm was rapidly intensifying offshore, expected to hit within hours. Nobody would question a loss of communication during a storm. Nobody would search for missing tourists until long after the evidence was gone. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Our host had planned everything around the weather. I don't remember much after that. The drugs in the pool finally took effect, and the world went dark. We woke up in a Coast Guard helicopter, having been found drifting in a life raft nearly a mile offshore. The house was empty, all the equipment gone. The storm had conveniently washed away any evidence that might have been left behind. The FBI told us later that they'd been tracking similar cases for years. Young tourists lured to luxury rentals only to disappear during convenient natural disasters, but they never found enough evidence to identify the perpetrator. Sometimes I still browse luxury rental listings, looking for familiar photographs. Every time I see a too good to be true discount, I wonder if it's them, still out there, still hunting. And I wonder how many dream vacations have turned into nightmares in beautiful houses with ocean views and hidden rooms. The cruise deal was too good to pass up. A last-minute Mediterranean voyage at 80% off because of a booking system glitch. At least, that's what the email claimed. Emily and I had been planning a vacation together for months, and this seemed like fate. The ship was enormous, a floating city that could hold over 5,000 passengers. But when we boarded in Barcelona, something felt off. The ship was eerily empty for peak season. We expected crowds at check-in, but the terminal was nearly deserted. Our footsteps echoed through empty corridors as a crew member led us to our cabin. The ship could accommodate thousands, but we passed only a handful of other passengers. The crew member explained that many travelers had canceled last minute due to problems with the booking system. That's why the prices dropped so dramatically. Our cabin was beautiful, with a private balcony and ocean view. But something about it bothered me. The closet contained clothes that weren't ours, designer pieces with tags still attached. A half-unpacked suitcase sat in the corner. When we called the front desk, they apologized profusely. Apparently, the previous passengers had disembarked suddenly, leaving their belongings behind. They promised to remove everything immediately. That night, I couldn't sleep. I started researching the ship on my laptop, using the surprisingly fast internet. What I found disturbed me. Social media was filled with posts about passengers who had mysteriously left the ship at various ports over the past month. Some never made it home. Comments mentioned similar stories from other ships owned by the same company, all featuring last-minute deals too good to be true. Emily discovered the passenger manifest the next morning, accidentally left in our cabin's desk drawer. Names were crossed out in red ink with dates and times noted beside them. Our names were at the bottom of the list, still uncrossed. Next to them was tomorrow's date and Port of Tunis, 02. We weren't scheduled to dock in Tunis until the following afternoon. At dinner, the massive dining room held only 20 or 30 people. Half-eaten meals sat on nearby tables as if their occupants had left in a hurry. The waiters acted like nothing was wrong, cheerfully serving gourmet dishes to the scattered guests. I noticed the other passengers looked nervous, checking their phones constantly, speaking in whispers. Some tables had place cards with names crossed out in that same red ink. While exploring the ship, we got lost and stumbled into a restricted area. Through a partially open door, we saw a room filled with security monitors. Camera feeds showed every corridor, every public space. In one corner, a monitor displayed what looked like thermal imaging of passenger cabins. Some were marked with red X's. Others, including ours, had countdown timers next to them. On our way back to our cabin, we took a wrong turn and found ourselves in the medical bay. It was much larger than the one shown on the ship's tour. Surgical equipment gleamed under bright lights. What caught my attention were the coolers, dozens of them, labeled with medical transport codes. A clipboard nearby listed organ types and preservation requirements. This wasn't a normal cruise ship infirmary. In our panic to leave the medical bay, Emily grabbed some papers. Back in our cabin, we read them carefully. They were shipping manifests for medical transport containers, scheduled for delivery at various ports. The dates matched the crossed-out names on the passenger list. The ship wasn't just a cruise liner, it was a mobile organ harvesting operation, targeting healthy tourists with too-good-to-be-true vacation deals. Later that evening, we heard wheels squeaking outside our door. Through the peephole, we saw a service cart draped with white cloth. Something metallic glinted underneath, surgical tools. 2 crew members in medical scrubs stood at the next cabin. We heard muffled screams, quickly silenced. The passenger manifest had shown that cabin's occupants scheduled for disembarkation that night. We had to find a way off the ship. The regular exits were all monitored, so we headed to the lower decks. In the engine room, we discovered something horrifying. A hidden door leading to what looked like a morgue. Body bags were stacked neatly, waiting to be disposed of at sea. Charts on the wall showed ocean currents and depths. They had planned everything meticulously. In our search for help, we found the radio room. The equipment was old but functional. As we tried to figure out how to use it, we saw a series of messages on the operator's screen. They were coordinating with other ships, sharing passenger lists and harvest schedules. This wasn't just one ship. It was an entire fleet of floating organ farms, preying on unsuspecting tourists. When we tried to reach the lifeboats, we found most of them disabled. Ropes were cut, engines removed. They needed to ensure their victims couldn't escape. The few functioning boats were probably reserved for the crew's own escape if authorities ever caught on. A storm was approaching, perfect cover for making passengers disappear. I don't remember how we got off the ship. Coast Guard found us in a stolen tender boat, half frozen and terrified. By the time authorities reached the cruise ship, it had changed course. They found it empty in international waters, all evidence destroyed. The crew had vanished, taking their remaining victims with them. The investigation is still ongoing. They found similar operations on other cruise lines, always targeting specific passengers with incredible last-minute deals. The ships disappear for weeks, then reappear with new names, new paint jobs, ready to trap more victims. Sometimes I still see those deals pop up online. Luxury cruises at impossible prices. And I wonder how many people book their dream vacations, not knowing they're sailing into a floating nightmare where their organs are worth more than their ticket.